What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's transfer tips for game week 6. I'm going to go through some of the popular players being moved in and out of people's squads and discuss whether they are good moves or not. So as always, if you enjoyed the video and find it useful, make sure to give it a like. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. And don't forget to check out Fantasy Football Hub to get your suggested transfers. There is 50% off at the moment if you sign up, but that offer is ending this week. Links in the description below. More on that to come later. So I think we've got to start with Luis Díaz. He began the season at 7.5 million. He's now gone up to 7.9. He's already had a price rise this week. Over 600,000 transfers in. It's just a matter of when, not if, he goes to 8 million. And that will almost certainly happen ahead of the game week 6 deadline. So by the time we get to Saturday, Luis Díaz will probably be an £8 million player. And I am still struggling to decide how much of an good option I think he is going forward. Like, I'm not stupid. I can clearly see that he's played really well for Liverpool so far. He's clearly first choice left wing as well. I don't have any doubts about that. 3 double-digit hauls, and he's the top scoring midfielder. If he keeps this up, the price is an absolute joke, and he should be locked into my team. But why isn't that the case? I'm wildcarding this week. Why am I still having doubts about whether he should be in? I've said that I'm going to lock Saka, Rodgers and Mbeumo in. Why not Luis Díaz? The things that are playing on my mind is the slot comments about wanting to play Gakpo in game week 4. That was something he literally said, that he wanted to play Gakpo, or at least he was intending to, but Luis Díaz came back fitter from the international break. Then obviously Luis Díaz gets benched in the Champions League. And of course, from an FPL point of view, if all Luis Díaz benchings come in the Champions League, that is perfect. But they might not at some point. At some point over the next 6 game weeks, he may get benched. Now, a lot of people will argue if he keeps this up, one benching in 6 game weeks is not a problem, and I would probably agree. But what if that turns into 2 benchings and a blank in one of the other games? Suddenly he doesn't look like such a good option. And I think the thing that's happening right now, and this is where I'm a little bit conflicted, is I don't necessarily think that because this is what's happened so far and Díaz has been amazing means that it's always going to happen in the future. Like, some people have said to me, you've got to have Liverpool players, they're in form. But part of the reason they're in form is because of the fixtures they've had, right? There's a reason that people went for them very early on. They had Ipswich, Brentford, Man United, which for Liverpool is a pretty good fixture, Forest at home and Bournemouth at home. We all saw those fixtures in pre-season, and most of us had at least one Liverpool player. That's not what they've got in front of them. Wolves away is a pretty good fixture, Palace away a bit trickier, Chelsea at home a little bit trickier again, and then Arsenal away in game week 9 is really hard, right? Lots of people didn't even captain Erling Haaland against Arsenal at home. How well is Luis Díaz going to do away from home? So the next 4 fixtures don't look quite so good. There is possibly one benching in there as well. And look, he's putting up really good numbers. 0.68 expected goals per 90 is fantastic. Even if you account for the fact he never gets, or very rarely gets past 70 minutes, that's still good. But he's got goals at 1.25 per 90 minutes. So he's also overperforming a little bit. This is why I'm conflicted. I'm not... on these videos, I try not to say this player is absolutely essential or this player should be completely avoided. I'm trying to give you both sides to the story, because I know lots of people are looking at Díaz thinking, why are you even talking about this? Just get him in your team. And I am wondering whether I've got it wrong, because so many people are buying him. So many people are sure that he's a great option. I'm fine to admit that maybe I'm just wrong on this, and I could be. But also, he's getting to a price point now where you've really got to be sure about it, because there's lots of good cheaper options as well. And as you know, there's a certain player around that price that takes penalties and will play every single minute over the next 6 to 10 game weeks that I'm considering as well. I don't know. I can't sit here and say he's a bad option, right? If you want to bring him in, you absolutely should. Like, Wolves away on its own is an amazing fixture. But what happens after the next international break? Does Gakpo play that game? And if he does, right, let's say he play. When is the next international break? I think it's after game week 7. I mean, it's Chelsea at home, so perhaps Luis Díaz just plays that because it's Chelsea. But what if he gets benched in, I don't know, 10 or 11 against Brighton or Villa? Should that be playing on my mind? I think it's easy to say now that who cares about one benching? He can do damage off the bench and he'll score enough points in the other games. But if that doesn't happen, he doesn't score off the bench and he blanks, I'm telling you now, I've been here so many times before, people will change their opinion as soon as the blank happens. So I will not sit here and say he's a bad pick. He's clearly not. He's a really good pick. But I'm still not, no matter how much I think about it and I read the comments, I'm still not fully on board with it. Could I see him making my final wildcard draft? There's potential there. I'm not ruling him out completely. But I still think it's unlikely. There's only like one midfield spot for most people on wildcard, like Saka, Mbeumo, Rodgers. Maybe there's two after that, but one of them's probably got to be quite cheap, like Semenyo or McNeil or Smith Rowe. So you've got one more spot. So it's Luis Díaz versus everyone else. I'm just really just trying to get my thoughts out there because I'm struggling with this one. I think it's easy when no one else is buying a player to say, well, they're just not good. It's not so easy to say, no, I don't rate Luis Díaz as an option when over 600,000 people have brought him in again. Bearing in mind he had quite a lot of sales in previous weeks. But I'm rambling now. That's the reason that I'm not quite sure. I may just go for him. I can always fix it down the line if I want to. He's a good pick, I'm sure. Just a quick reminder that if you're struggling for what transfer to make in your own team, you can use the AI suggested transfers tool over on Fantasy Football Hub. So I've got my team in the tool right now. All you have to do is click on AI transfers at the top. It will think about which moves to make and then give you a recommendation. So as many of you know, I'm on a wild card this week, but just as an example, if I wasn't, the tool wants me to do Pedro Porro to Gabriel with the money that I had in the bank, which looks like a pretty good transfer with the fixtures that Arsenal have got coming up. And to some people that might look like an obvious transfer, but it's nice to get confirmation from the tool that it thinks that is the best move to make. If you're looking at that thinking, well, I don't really want to sell Porro, you can click on the don't sell button and get it to give you a different set of transfers. Likewise, you can use the custom transfers filter if there's particular players you want to bring in. So let's say you want only recommendations from Arsenal this week because they're Leicester at home, Southampton at home. You can do that and get it to suggest you moves. At the moment, there is 50% off, and that will give you access to all the tools if you sign up yearly, and that offer is ending this week. Otherwise, if you just want to try it out, you can sign up monthly. So it's not just this tool that you've got access to, but the OptaStats, Fixture Analyzer, and more. Links in the description below. So let's talk about Salah next. Over 200,000 transfers out so far this week, and it is worth saying this is a very popular wildcard week. So most of those transfers might be people on wildcard, and I think it is okay to go without him. I've said that for a couple of weeks now. Game week 4, game week 5 wildcard, I would have probably kept Salah for captaincy, especially in game week 5. But game week 6 onwards, there are lots of weeks where you can just captain Haaland, and between the two, if I was only going for one, at the moment I think it has to be Haaland. And I don't like going for both because I'd rather spend that money elsewhere. It's perfectly reasonable on wildcard to keep Salah. I've seen some pretty good drafts going around. My preference is just to go without, have Saka instead, and then an extra 2.5, 2.6 million, whatever it is now, to spend elsewhere. Let's talk about it from the point of view that you're not wildcarding and you're considering selling him. If you've got 2 or 3 transfers and you're shifting funds around, I think that's a pretty good move. So let's say you're doing something like Salah to Saka, which is what most people are looking at, or even like Salah to Palmer, and then that money is going to be used for another move like a 4.5 million defender to Gabriel. I like that. And in that situation, I would probably sell Salah, as long as you're happy not having him for a good few weeks now. So I think once he's gone, you shouldn't be looking in a couple of game weeks' time to bring him back. Not for Chelsea at home, Arsenal away. It's probably one for game week 10 or onwards. So if you're happy with that, I mean, that's a good use of multiple transfers. If you're in the situation where you've only got one transfer, should you be selling him to Saka? I'm not convinced. Like, Saka is great this week against Leicester at home, but I don't think he's miles ahead of Salah against Wolves away. Wolves themselves have got a lot of defensive problems. Mosquera is going to be out now for that game as well. They're already conceding a lot of goals. That's a good fixture. And sometimes people want to make a one transfer move to have funds in a future week. But in that case, I would rather just roll the transfer. Keep Salah. He's just as good, I would say, as Saka this week, or at least close to. And you can decide what to do next week with 2 free transfers instead. And it might be that Salah does so well against Wolves, you have a change of heart and you want to keep hold of him. And I think with the fixtures that Saka has got, he is great. But this week against Leicester at home, most people are going to captain Haaland against Newcastle away. You could also look at Salah against Wolves away as a differential captain or just to keep this week. And then in game week 7, when Saka's got Southampton at home, which is arguably even easier than Leicester at home, Haaland's then got a home game against Fulham. So again, most people are just going to captain Haaland instead. Saka against Leicester and Southampton at home, again, is a nice differential captain if you want to go different over someone like Haaland or Salah. So I'm not saying you can't do that single move, but I think in a lot of cases, if I look at people's squads and they've got one transfer with Salah in there, I don't think that moving to Saka in game week 6 is necessarily a priority. And you could just wait until you've got 2 transfers next week to see if there's a different kind of move you want to make. And if it still ends up being Salah to Saka, that is fine. right? Doesn't mean you have to do it this week. So on wildcard, I'm okay going without him. Multiple transfers to fund other moves. I like selling him this week. Single transfer, I think about keeping him. So as expected, Bryan Mbeumo heavily transferred in ahead of game week 6. Over 450,000 transfers in already this week. And the guy's already got 4 goals in the first 5 game weeks. I feel like that's kind of gone under the radar a little bit, especially when they've already played Liverpool, City and Spurs away from home. Now, to be fair, he blanked against Liverpool and City away, but a lot of players do. He's got a goal against Palace in game week 1, 2 goals against Southampton in 3, and then a goal against Spurs in game week 5. So I think any concerns about Thiago, Visser, Tony not being there, I don't really think are relevant. He is just an amazing FPL pick that has got everything you could want. And at 7.2 million, I'd go as far as saying that he's a bargain. I listened to Planet FPL the other day, and I know James didn't want to go as far to say that he's essential, but I think he's pretty close to it because of the value that he offers. 90-minute man on penalties, really good stats as well, by the way. He is just a quality player. 0.35 expected goals per 90, 0.26 expected assists. I think Mbeumo in the next season or two is going to get picked up by a bigger club, and the fixtures are just ridiculous. West Ham at home, Wolves at home, United away, Ipswich at home, Fulham away, Bournemouth at home. There's nothing to worry about there. And even after that, you go on a bit longer. It's, where did I get up to? Bournemouth at home, I think. Everton away, Leicester at home, Villa away. Newcastle at home right now does not look like a bad fixture. Okay, Chelsea away in game week 16 is a little bit tougher. That's miles away, right? We don't care about that right now. So if you're going to ask me at any point this week in the comments on the deadline stream, is Mbeumo a good transfer in? Yes, he is. So I think I've got to quickly talk about Durán. Another appearance off the bench for Aston Villa, another goal. The guy now has 4 goals in the first 5 game weeks, which is absolutely ridiculous. And if you look at his goals per 90 minutes this season, it's 2.75, which is absolutely mad. He's had over 130,000 transfers in this week. But I've got to say, surprise, surprise, you probably shouldn't be buying him. I know 6.1 million looks like a nice price, but for that money you can get Chris Wood, Calvert-Lewin absolutely nailed on to start on penalties as well. Like, I get it. He scored 4 goals off the bench. If that continues, he's still a pretty good price, but it's not gonna. He's not going to continue scoring at this rate. I don't think that's a crazy thing to say. And I suspect that some people are looking at it as, well, he will keep scoring off the bench. And because he's doing so well, Unai Emery will have to play him at some point. And I suspect that will happen. Unai Emery's already mentioned that it's up to him to find a way to get Durán and Watkins in the team. They've got to learn to play together and stuff like that. It's going to be hard to keep him down, but I think he'll get his chance to start in the Carabao Cup this week. And then I suspect for Ipswich away, it'll be Rodgers as the 10 and Watkins as the 9. You just can't buy players in FPL that you know are going to get benched. Like, this rate of returns will not continue. If he begins to get into the 11, different conversation. For that price, he could be great. Although, at that point, I suspect in classic FPL style, he'll stop returning. So he'll get starts and then the goals will dry up. I can just predict that happening. But if he does start, we come back to it. But for now, he's an easy avoid for me. So I want to talk about Gabriel next. And look, he's had nearly 500,000 transfers in. He's got goals against Spurs away and City away, plus 3 clean sheets in the first 5 game weeks. You do not need me to tell you that he's a good pick. He just is. But I want to talk about a couple of things. One, should you still go for Gabriel over Saliba, given that he's now gone up to 6.1 million? And also, for people with Saliba, should you be using a transfer to make a sideways move to Gabriel? Now, on the price thing, I think while it's only 0.1 million difference, you definitely go for Gabriel. It's pretty clear to see, and to be honest, I think it has been for the last season or so, that Gabriel has higher goal threat from set pieces. It hasn't always worked out in previous seasons that when people have gone for Gabriel over Saliba, that he's got all the goals in the period that people have owned him. But I think overall, if you're looking at this season, the next season, and they both get similar minutes, Gabriel will get more returns. And it's not that Saliba is a terrible option or anything like that, or that he can't score, because he has done that over the last couple of years. Like 2 goals last season, 2 goals the season before. But if you look at Gabriel, it was 3 goals last season, 3 the year before that, 5 goals the previous season as well. He's got history of doing this. So I think at the moment, while he's 6.1, if you've got the money, you just spend that little bit extra. If it gets to the point where Saliba drops to 5.9 and Gabriel goes up to 6.2, I think we revisit it if you haven't bought in Arsenal defenders yet. And at that point, maybe you go for Saliba. You just take the chance on the goals and just save the money. But right now, it's only 0.1 million difference. On the sideways move, I think that's a little bit trickier. My gut instinct is if I had Saliba, I would not use a transfer to go to Gabriel. I would fix that on wildcard. If you've already wildcarded, it is a little bit trickier, but I still think that transfer will be more useful elsewhere. I think you'll gain more points by using it on a different issue in your team than switching Saliba to Gabriel. Maybe if you get to the point where you've got 3 or 4 saved up and your team still looks fantastic, you've got no moves to make, maybe at that point you do it, but I'm not convinced I would do it right now. Of course, that's going to look really stupid if Gabriel scores another goal in each of the next 2 games, but I just think if you've already got Saliba, you're already covering those clean sheets. You know he's absolutely nailed on, right? Saliba's going nowhere. I don't think Gabriel is either, by the way. But I think you're better off just saving the transfer. Like, it is one of those, like, tricky decisions because you just continue to look stupid if Gabriel keeps scoring. And I do think he has the higher goal threat, but it might be that Saliba gets a goal over the next couple. You just don't know. I think in most cases, I just wouldn't use a transfer, especially if I had one. Like, you never know what's going to happen next week with injury, suspensions and stuff like that. I think there'll be a better use of a transfer. So I would pay the extra 0.1 if I'm buying new right now. And maybe even for 0.2 million difference, I would still do it. But if I had Saliba, I think I would hold the transfer rather than move into Gabriel. So I've just spoken about Gabriel and I showed you my suggested transfers earlier, which were Porro to Gabriel. And that probably explains why Porro has had nearly 200,000 transfers out this week. And I think my general opinion on selling Porro is it's fine. If you want to do it to get an Arsenal defender, that makes a lot of sense. I still think from game week 8 onwards, Spurs fixtures are quite good. West Ham at home, Palace away, Villa at home, Ipswich at home. Not perfect, but still pretty decent for a defender that's fairly attacking and is absolutely nailed on. And one thing to point out is Spurs' defence actually hasn't been that bad so far. Now, they're a defence that I don't mind playing my attackers against. And I think we always see them as a team that are going to concede at least 1 goal. And they did again at the weekend against Brentford. And maybe Vicario was a bit dodgy at times and stuff like that. But actually, when I was looking on the Opta Stats tool on Hub, so if I just go to teams here, then expected goals conceded for the season so far, Ipswich, Brentford, West Ham, Southampton, the bottom 4. And by the way, with Brentford, anyone considering like Flecken or someone like that, they have had pretty tough games, City, Liverpool and Spurs away from home. I think those defensive numbers will improve. But anyway, we're talking about Spurs. The best 4 teams so far, Liverpool 3.7, City 3.8, Forest 4.4, and then Spurs 4.9. So even ahead of Arsenal. Now, Arsenal have played a couple of games down to 10 men and stuff like that. They've also played Man City, etc. But I still think that's quite good for Spurs so far to have been in the top 5. Now, they have had okay-ish fixtures, to be fair. They've played Arsenal, but then the rest of them are Leicester, Everton, Newcastle and Brentford. But compared to what we saw last year, when Spurs' defensive numbers were terrible, that is pretty promising going forward. And I think it does help that they've got a lot of players fit. Last year, they had a lot of issues with like Van der Ven, Udogie missed out, of course, as well. Did Porro miss out at some point? I think he might have done. I might be wrong about that. But either way, they've got their first choice back 4. The attack's doing well. I think Solanke also helps their defence. He's very good pressing from the front, allows them to do that a bit better. I guess what I'm trying to say in a long-winded way, Spurs' defence is probably better than it was last year. The fixtures coming up are good. There is every reason to hold Porro, but I completely get why people are selling him, and I don't think it's a problem whatsoever. Also, he has gone up from 5.5 to 5.6 million, but I was checking the price changes, and he's very close to going back down to 5.5. So if you're worried about selling him because you got money wrapped up, I wouldn't be. So selling Porro is fine, but I do think game week 8 onwards, he's still a pretty good option. So it's Alexander Isak next, and I think at this point it's probably time to just admit defeat with him. He started the season at 8.5, he's dropped to 8.3, nearly 400,000 transfers out this week. It's City at home in 6. Even Everton away in game week 7 now doesn't look like the easiest fixture if Mikalenko and Branthwaite are back, especially with the way that Newcastle are playing. Chelsea away in 9, Arsenal at home in 10. It's not a great fixture run. They haven't played particularly well this season, and Isak definitely hasn't. I think compared to what we expected from him, he's been pretty poor. Only 2 attacking returns this season so far, 0.31 expected goals per 90. It's right down on what we've come to expect. And I look back to pre-season, I think, did we just get it massively wrong? Because there was hardly any people that were against Isak as a pick. You're always going to get someone that thinks a player is a trap or whatever, and in this case, maybe they were right. But I think with the fixtures Newcastle had and the price that Isak was put at, the fact that he was on penalties, there's no Callum Wilson, I still stand by the fact he was a good pick, and it just hasn't worked out, and that can sometimes happen. But I guess at some point you've got to, like I say, admit defeat, and it's sometimes easier to do that with certain players than others, of course. But yeah, I think with the fixtures they've got coming up, the way that he's playing, the other good forwards that we have to choose from at the moment, obviously Haaland, Jackson, Solanke, Havertz, Chris Wood, Calvert-Lewin, João Pedro if he's fit, etc. There's only 3 spots, and I just don't... Watkins as well, by the way, before I forget about him. There's only 3 spots, and I don't think that Isak should be taken up one. So whether you're on wildcard or not, he's a pretty good sell at the moment. So speaking of forwards, let's talk about N.Jackson next. Over 400,000 transfers in so far this week after his 2 goals, 1 assist against West Ham. He's now up to 7.7 million. And in general, I think he's a really good FPL pick. I owned him for a lot of last season because the underlying stats, like his expected goals, were decent. Didn't always translate into goals when I owned him, but for the season, he got 16 in his debut season for Chelsea. I think that's really impressive, and he's carried that on into this year. 0.78 expected goals per 90, 4 goals, 2 assists from the first 5 game weeks, including having already played Man City in game week 1. So he is just a good option. Is now the right time to bring him in? I'm not 100% sure. And I think a lot of it will depend on whether you're wildcarding, who else you're looking to bring in later, how many free transfers you've got and stuff like that. But overall, I don't know if the timing is correct because from game week 8 onwards, Chelsea have got Liverpool away, Newcastle at home, Man United away and Arsenal at home. That looks to be a little bit of a tricky run. And obviously, as I already mentioned with Porro, that is a time when Spurs have got pretty good fixtures and Solanke is slightly cheaper than Jackson. So you've got West Ham at home, Palace away, Villa at home, Ipswich at home, up against those 4 fixtures that I just mentioned for Chelsea. Even after that, for Spurs, it's City away in 12, but then it's Fulham at home and Bournemouth away, which is pretty good. Then it's Chelsea at home in 15, but then it's Southampton away in 16. So I think for 6 and 7, Jackson is probably a little bit better than Solanke, but I think straight after that, Solanke is better. So that's why I'm questioning whether now is the right time to bring him in. If you're sitting there with 3 or 4 transfers, or you're wildcarding and straight after you're going to have like 2 or 3, then maybe you go for Jackson for 2 weeks and then get in Solanke later. That could be a good use of transfers. But even then, like Brighton at home and Forest side were not necessarily easy, but also Chelsea have played pretty well. And actually, for all the jokes and stuff about the players they've brought, Maresca and stuff like that, they've got really good squad depth, which of course means that Jackson might get bought off early at times. But it just means overall, whenever they make a substitution, especially in attack, it doesn't really weaken their team. So I think you can frame it different ways. From 8 onwards, I definitely prefer Solanke. But actually, 3 of the next 4 are at home. Brighton, Forest and Newcastle. Not the easiest fixtures, but not terrible either. And maybe you just look past the Liverpool away game. The only slight thing with him is, this does remind me a little bit of after game week 2. Madueke goes and bangs a hat-trick. Everyone brings him in. Then he blanks for 3 games. And similar with Cole Palmer. Now, he hasn't blanked, but he was suddenly really popular after 4 returns. Then he goes and gets an assist in 3, a goal in 5. And people aren't so keen on him. I think Jackson's done really well. He is just a good pick. But a lot of the reason he's being transferred in is because he's just got 3 returns. And obviously you can't expect that every single week. And if you're buying him, expecting him to continue that, it's just not going to happen. So in isolation, good pick. I prefer Solanke from 8, but no harm bringing him in and maybe moving him on later if you want to. So I was a little bit surprised to see that Konaté had been brought in by over 100,000 FPL managers this week. But then I thought maybe I shouldn't be surprised. Maybe it's just been a mistake not really recommending him as an option over the first few weeks. Because since he came in at half-time in game week 1, he started every single game. And he's much cheaper than Van Dijk, Robertson, Trent, etc. Getting a Liverpool defender for 5.1 sounds pretty good. That being said, I do question whether this is the right time to bring him in. First of all, from a fixtures point of view, you could argue that Salah and Díaz, etc. are still really good because Wolves away, Palace away and Chelsea home is not that bad. But from a defensive point of view, it doesn't look great, I would say. You've got 2 away games. Yes, Wolves are struggling defensively and that might affect their overall game, but they've still got a decent enough attack. Palace away, the likes of Mateta, Nketiah, Eze. Then it's Chelsea at home, which won't be easy. Then Arsenal away in 9. So I'm not sure how many clean sheets I really see there for Liverpool. And Konaté doesn't really have the attacking upside that the likes of Trent do. But obviously he is, or Trent does, I should say, but he is a lot cheaper. So again, I'm a little bit conflicted in general on Liverpool because they have played really well. The defensive numbers are excellent so far. Any concerns people had, by the way, I didn't have these concerns, but any concerns that people had in pre-season about a drop-off under Slot, not happened at all. But they've also had really good fixtures. That is playing a part in how well they've done, and the fixtures are about to turn. So I think Konaté is fine. I'm not expecting a huge amount of clean sheets. And also, with the amount of midweek games coming up now, I just feel like Konaté will break at some point, or there will be some rotation with Quansah. Now, in the short term, I don't think it's a problem. There's a Carabao Cup fixture. That's a great time to play Quansah, rest Konaté, and have him play against Wolves away. But I just think over the next kind of 4 or 5 game weeks, we may see him miss a Premier League game. Possibly. Maybe this is just going to be the season where he continues to play and he's absolutely fine. But we've seen plenty of times before that he's not able to play that many matches. So in theory, it looks great. But personally, this is one that I'd prefer to come back to in Game Week 10 when Liverpool's fixtures get good again. If you've enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button, and rate 5 stars if you're listening on podcast. Don't forget to check out Fantasy Football Hub. Links in the description below. The 50% off offer ends this week as well. So don't forget to get signed up before that happens. Otherwise, I will leave it there and I'll be back tomorrow with the Game Week preview.